Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us today, both in person and online. Welcome to our session called The Everyday Application of Science, a cross-disciplinary dialogue between emerging researchers. This year at SALTISE, we decided to engage in a collaborative pilot project that explores the different ways knowledge can be exchanged and produced at academic conferences across disciplines and expertise. As an addition to the two keynotes for this conference, we organized a panel of early career researchers to provide reflections on the keynote's work and the themes for this conference. All of our panelists except Maria Grulong are here with us today. We have with us on stage Midat Noor Kiani, Rhonda Chung, Asia Blackman, Dr. Hajra Sidibe, and Weiwei joining us virtually. Thank you, Weiwei. My name is Jamila. Alongside my colleague Corey Legasic, I have been facilitating the development of this panel and will be your co-moderator today. I am also a PhD candidate of sociology at Concordia University. My research focuses on elevating anti-colonial representations of marginalized communities in the social sciences. I'm currently working on a documentary on the diversity of Black masculinity in Canada. I also specialize in designing and facilitating collaborative, multidisciplinary spaces for knowledge exchange. As a consultant for the organization I founded, the Decolonial Perspectives and Practices Hub. I'm very grateful to be here. To give you a glimpse into the process of constructing this panel, over the past few months, we have met as a group to unpack one public talk and published article by the keynote speakers for this conference. Today, we invite you into our collaborative circle to witness our multidisciplinary dialogical dance in real time as we continue to self-reflect on the ways that Dr. Gomez, Dr. Lee, and Dr. Calvez's work can be made accessible and applicable to our work and the realm of active learning. Although Dr. Gomez could not be with us today for this conference, we wanted to honor her approach to collaborative learning and with her contributor and co-author, Dr. Lee. Ultimately, we intend for this panel to model a collaborative process of learning and adopting inclusive and equitable approaches to pedagogy that we guide you to deepen at other conferences, academic spaces, and amongst your peers.
So hi everyone, my name is Corey Legasic, and I am a first-year PhD student at McGill in Integrated Studies in Education. I'm also part of the faculties here at Dawson College in Humanities and Sociology. I'm also co-coordinator with a friend here at New School, which is an alternative school here at Dawson, which is centered around critical humanistic education. And I'm also part of, luckily, a bunch of communities of practice that are contributing to this conference today in a variety of ways. I wanted to start off by saying that I'm born and raised here. Jojage, Montreal is my home, and I wanted to take a second to talk about a territorial acknowledgement. And through the intersections of my own identities and my experiences, I'm committed to understanding my role and my responsibilities, especially as a white settler here on unceded Kanien'kehá:ka lands. And I see relationships as both means and ends in my work. So I'd like to start off by framing today's panel through our ongoing work of acknowledging the lands and waters we gather on and around. So conferences often start with land acknowledgements that open proceedings, but they can also frame and scaffold the kinds of relationships that we're trying to build here. Land acknowledgements are not just a ceremonial gesture to cover some ethical ground, but a chance to live in the messy paradox of our intentions and the ongoing impacts of our presence here. Just as I understand settler colonialism to be an ongoing process, not just an event, a conference is also a set of relationships, not just an event. So we come together in person at Dawson and also virtually through a nexus of platforms. We're here to exchange ideas, to network, to encourage each other, to engage each other. And from our different physical and social locations, we have to continue the hard work of connecting with the lands and waters that hold us here as we connect with each other. So it's important that we learn about the history and struggles surrounding this territory. Oh, if you can go back one slide, sorry. So it's important that we learn about the history and struggles surrounding this territory. One way that I've seen at conferences internationally, especially in the Western Hemisphere, is to use nativeland.ca to start some of the work of learning about the territories we're on. And for attendees who are less familiar with Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, Dawson is located on unceded territory that is a long-standing gathering place among indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people nations. Acknowledgements are important because in speaking them and repeating them, as we will do throughout this conference, they disrupt erasure. But we also know that they're not enough. So I also appreciate the work of the Feminist Media Studio, who were the first to make me really start thinking about how our platforms today, like YouTube and Zoom, on which we gather, also do not emerge in a vacuum. These platforms are a product of Silicon Valley, and for example, Zoom's headquarters are located on Muwekmao'oloni territory. Many of us on this panel are here to connect around a desire for transformative justice in our work. Transformative justice requires acknowledgement, real talk, real work about new ways of being together and working collaboratively that care for all of our relations across time, across space. So SALTISE is committed to doing this work itself, slowly, with our own growing pains, but also in innovating the idea of this conference as a process, not just an event. So this collaborative panel, these amazing people beside me, through this panel, our project aims to spotlight us as students and our work, to model the diversity of knowledge production and knowledge sharing across disciplines. And we also invite the question, how can we keep reimagining and innovating conferences to reflect our commitments to transformative justice?
Thank you, Corey. So another Thank you. So another component of grounding the space is rules of engagement. So for this collaborative knowledge exchange, we really thought about things that made it productive and fruitful. And so these are the things we reflected on. All parties need to come with humility, respect, diplomacy, and flexibility. These are qualities outlined by Dr. Calvez that we will unpack later. We all showed up to our bi-weekly meetings, our reading circles, willing to admire and appreciate and validate each other's experiences and expertise as we come from different cultures, standpoints, and disciplines. We ask that you join us in this collaborative space with the same ethics. Coming to this space with curiosity and openness to ethical and equitable approaches to education. We ask you to be vulnerable to the constraints and fears we collectively experience sustaining equity in educational environments. We ask you to be humble to the intersectionality of our lived experiences and to be respectful of the expertise emerging researchers have to critique and transform within academic spaces. As our last rule of engagement, try your best, please, to stay for the full session just to avoid disruption. Hold your questions until the end. We're going to have a short question and answer period. And we're just very grateful for your presence. Let's get into the discussion today. So it's really been a pleasure working with all of you for the last 2 months. And I really would like to start this by all of you introducing yourselves to the audience, saying a little bit about your work and why you participated in this study. So I'll just call your names individually to make it easier. Let's start with Rhonda.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rhonda Chung. I've been a teacher of English and French as a second language for about 10 years now. I'm originally from Toronto. I've lived in Montreal now for 16 years. I can't believe that. But my interest is in acts of listening, specifically speech perception. I'm interested in dialect variation as a reflection of place, so land. And in terms of pedagogy, I'm interested in strategic inclusivity. So it's not just inclusivity one for all, but being strategic about the voices that we center in our discourse.
Thank you, Rhonda. I'm going to pass it to Medad.
Hi everyone, I'm Medit Nurikiani and I am a first year doctoral student at Department of Integrated Studies in Education of McGill University and my major is Science and Mathematics Education and I am a Mary Marsh Fellow and also I received President Goes Medal for my past achievements and currently I am involved in multiple research projects in my department related to interdisciplinary teaching and learning and STEM and STEAM education. And as it's end of my first year, so I'm currently exploring my research area for the doctoral study, and I'm interested in designing a participatory and informal learning space for students where they can gain awareness, understanding, and knowledge of sustainable development and sustainable development goals. And for me, it's not even an year since I'm living in Montreal, so I'm glad to be here and looking forward to talk about more of the work we have been engaging in. And I think for me, this panel is an opportunity to know more about people from other fields, to hear different voices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Asia.
Hi, everybody. My name is Asia Blackman, and I am a 26-year-old Barbadian student. I'm currently attending McGill University, pursuing my Master's of Science in Epidemiology. My research concentration is going to be reproductive epidemiology, but my interests are also in health inequities. I'm here today because I have a long history with peer educating. I was a college prep advisor and volunteer tutor for the past 8 years. So I'm obviously interested in informal learning spaces, but also formal learning spaces and how to bridge the gap between the two. And how to have more equity and diversion in our formal learning spaces by including more Black and Indigenous voices.
Thank you. Hadra.
Hi everyone, I'm Hadra. My background is in biochemistry and neuroscience, so I'm researching neurodegenerative disorders and their origins. And I'm also, have been in Montreal or in Canada for the past 12 years now. I'm from France and from Mali in Western Africa. And for me, I'm here today and I've been very happy to participate to this collaborative work because I think that it's very important to have the most diverse and the most inclusive group of people that you can have to answer the big question of our areas that can be linked to the pandemic, that can be linked to ecology, that can be linked to all the questions that will help us have a better future.
Thank you. And Wei, please tell us about you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. And it's an honor to be here. And I really want to thank SALTISE in this panel to give us a space to discuss and to reflect together. And thank everyone to make this work for me to join in Zoom. And I'm now a PhD student in University of California, Los Angeles. So I'm working with Dr. Gomez. My research interests around how we can design culturally sustaining STEAM environments to welcome and support more historically underrepresented students. So my passion is for intercultural learning and how we can celebrate students' creativity and their authentic expression in the space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wei. So I really want to get in. Oh.
Do we just want to let people know we also did have one other person with us, Maria Goulon, who could not be with us unfortunately today. Yeah. And so we actually have some of her contributions that we asked we wanted to share, but she was part of this process the whole way, but could not be here today because of a family emergency.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Corey. Yeah, we have some of our gracious panelists that will be delivering her contributions. So let's get into the discussion. I really want to start with my first question, and I'll just call on you to answer. So based on the work we read by Dr. Calvez and contributors and Dr. Gomez and Lee, what gaps or tensions exist in your field as it relates to equitable and collaborative learning in today's climate? I'm going to pass it first to Medad.
I think when we talk about sustainability and sustainable development, and recently I've been reading a lot of research and literature and development work on sustainable development. And I think for me, what I noticed and what I observed was that there is this intricate tension of neglecting the dimensions of sustainable development. Generally, there is more focus on social sustainability, more focus on economic sustainability and environmental sustainability, but we often neglect the third dimension, and it's often a debate among scientists, researchers, and educators that there is a third there is a third pillar which is called social sustainability. And I think in the past few weeks that we have been having discussions, these critical and reflective discussions around Dr. Gomez's work, Dr. Calve's work, and Dr. Lee's work. And when we are talking about bringing in socially situated practices and socially situated cognition into learning, into the classrooms, I think these discussions really surfaced this for me that we have been neglecting this third pillar of sustainability a lot. And I think that when we talk about Dr. Calve's work and developing spiritually informed attitudes, ideas, perspectives, and values, which is very important in the current world. And we do not only need to talk about the economic collapse or environmental degradation, but I think it's time we also acknowledge that we need to talk about the lack of respect or lack of humility, which is very important. And I think when we are talking about social sustainability, we need to acknowledge that when we are discussing the framework of sustainable development, we are talking about 5 Ps. We are not only talking about partnership, or we are not only talking about planet, we are also talking about people, we are talking about peace, we are talking about prosperity. So I think these discussions were very eye-opening for me, and after these discussions, I really realized that I think we need more work, we need more collaborative discussions around the concept of social sustainability and social inclusion. And I think I'm glad that today we are having this discussion, and we have an opportunity that we need to acknowledge this tension in the field of sustainable development.
Thank you, Midat. When you talk about social sustainability, it really makes me think of something Wei mentions about culturally responsive pedagogy. Wei, do you want to weigh in?
Yes, for sure. Same as Midat, I come from a STEM research background. So basically, I've been designing both in and out of school STEAM and STEM learning environments and programs for students who are underrepresented in the field. So the lens I've been using is a social cultural one. So which means that I regard learning not as something only happen in one's head, but it's a process that is situated in the whole social and cultural interactions and contexts. I think the social interaction piece is also a huge topic in Dr. Gomez and Dr. Lee's work. So in my previous research, when I'm using the sociocultural approach, I really want to see that how we can celebrate and welcome cultural diversity in STEAM and STEM learning environments, and think about how we can challenge the deficit thinking and redefine who can be part of the STEAM and STEM learning, and how we can learn science, engineering, computer science, and etc. So actually one of the pedagogical approaches that has been using in the field is called culturally relevant pedagogy. So which means that we center students' own cultural backgrounds and prior knowledge in the learning process, and to think about how we can develop different learning activities and how we can design the whole program for students. But there's a tension around this pedagogy, which is a lot of researchers are critiquing that when we are engaging students' cultural backgrounds and prior knowledge, actually a lot of times we are doing it in a very reductionist way to put students into different cultural categories, to label them with different different cultural characteristics or features. So in this way, we are not really supporting students' authentic expression and engagement. And so the problem I'm thinking is how we can truly value and celebrate students' own cultural, perspectives and cultural backgrounds. I think Dr. Calvis and collaborators' work really opened my mind. Their work around indigenous ways of knowing, and their argument that within, indigenous culture, there is a beautiful diversity there. So we can't only label one culture with some static, features and characteristics. So I think I want all of you to join me to keep thinking about this question. So how we can truly engage students' cultural backgrounds in a very sustainable way throughout the whole learning process, not only regarding cultural backgrounds and students' prior knowledge as a stepping stone for us to engage students.
Thank you very much, Wei. When I think of the social situatedness of learning, it brings me to language and how that works in the ecology of the classroom. And I would like to jump to Rhonda. Maybe you can talk about that.
Hi, thank you for that. So before I can talk to you about the gaps and tensions within the field of second language acquisition, I have to tell you just a little bit about its history. So as the name suggests, second language acquisition is that you are going to acquire a second language in addition to your first. And in the concept of Canadian society, that second language has either been English or French. And the idea being is that you're going to leave behind your first language so that you can use English and French on an ongoing basis. The way that it's worked traditionally in the classrooms here has been to center one variant, and that variant has been a standardized language. Standardized languages usually represent the variety of the upper middle class, the elite. When you come to class, it is understood that you will leave your home dialect behind because the standard is the way that educated people speak, and that's the way that you're going to conduct yourself in the rest of the world. So a lot of second language and second dialect acquisition has been the replacement of your home language for the educational language. And that has been a wonderful accomplishment for English only and French only language policies because it absolutely guarantees their futures at the expense of the people who speak other languages. And so when we come to the gaps, I think it's very clear what the gap is that gap in the language, it has to make room for other people. And that is not something that second language acquisition by its name suggests that it's ready to do. So we are now moving more into plurilingual futures. Plurilingualism threatens this second language or monolingual aspect of language learning. But for me to sort of I can tell that to you, and that's something, a policy that you might understand, but I want you to sort of come to your own understanding of what normative ways of being are. So I'm going to ask all of you to think about a bird. Okay? I didn't put that bird in your head. You put that bird in your own head. And by a show of hands, how many of you picked the robin redbreast? Cardinals? Pigeons? Seagulls? Okay, how many of you picked an ostrich? You know because I told you. So, and how many of you picked a penguin? Okay, great, that's great. But what I'm showing is that most of you picked something that was frequent in your input. And this is a really basic concept in cognitive studies. Whatever is most frequent for you becomes what's normative for you. However, an ostrich is also a bird. And some of you might say, well, when you think about birds, the ostrich doesn't fly. The ostrich is the fastest bird. In fact, it's the fastest land animal. It can outrun a cheetah because it has more sustainability. And a penguin is the fastest swimmer. It can outrun Usain Bolt, if they were doing it on land, in terms of its swimming. So the ostrich doesn't care about flight, and neither does the penguin. And if you keep thinking about a bird only in normative ways, you completely leave out all of the capacities and competencies of the ostrich and the penguin. And so this concept in cognitive science brings us to this understanding that frequency in the input has definitely, it has, some good notions for us, but it also has its limitations. And one thing that frequency in the input cannot account for is something called fast mapped learning, right? So fast mapping is you see something once and you remember it forever. And if that thing that you see or the way that you engage with it is fast mapped, oftentimes it means that it's very meaningful to you. And so when you're a child, it's fast mapping happens all the time. You see a word, you learn it, and before you know it, you've got 1,000 words. As you get older, fast mapping slows down a little bit, and it becomes your social engagement with things. And so this is called episodic memory. And when it's very, very powerful, you can remember what you ate, how things smelled, what you were wearing. It can be very powerful and very positive, but it could also be very negative and very traumatic. So meaning and what's meaningful runs the gamut of positive to negative. So when we look at gaps in any field, we are always thinking to ourselves, are we thinking like birds? Are we thinking like robins and cardinals? Or are we thinking about the ostriches and the penguins in our field? And part of what we have to do in all of our fields is to think not just about that big chunk in the middle, what's frequent in the input, but also the things that are on the margins. They're no less birds, they just do different things. In terms of second language acquisition, what that means concretely, it means bringing in students' other languages into the classroom. So yes, it's an ESL classroom or an FSL classroom, but there are other languages that are connected, that are meaningful to the student. They come from their roots, they come from their homes, and those need to be represented in the classroom somehow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rhonda. It just makes me think about the classroom as a hierarchical space. And I want to point to Asia to kind of talk a little bit about that.
So in thinking about answering this question when it relates to health research and other related fields, it pointed out to me immediately that obviously we can see that our classrooms are hierarchical spaces. And then forward from there, reading Calvez and colleagues' work and seeing how much emphasis they placed on individuals' perspectives and how being able to identify one's perspective and positionality is really important for identifying power dynamics which are present in spaces. And that highlighted for me the fact that students and instructors in health research related fields are placed in rigid, fixed relationships with predefined hierarchical roles, where there's limited, if any, intention placed on being able to identify the individual perspectives in the space and how these perspectives and their accompanying positionalities are going to show up. The curriculum is also highly decontextualized, so knowledge that is provided to persons in this space is not explicitly given context to the social, historical, or cultural context that these students are living in, so it's not connected to the real world, and there's no effort made to incorporate students' social or cultural backgrounds into the instructional materials and tools. This, plus our emphasis on producing tangible results, means that we tend to emphasize hard skills instead of interpersonal skills, which were identified by Calvez and colleagues as very helpful to identifying power dynamics within the space. And this means that functionally, this creates a one-size-fits-all approach to teaching, where students are offered limited, if any, agency to be active participants in determining the structure of their educational experience. But even further than that, it gives them limited opportunity to identify the power dynamics in their space, but then from there to be able to have open and engaging discussions with each other and with their instructors, where they have a say in defining the relationships that they have with each other, but the relationships that they have with their instructors, because they are not given the tools to do so. I think it was really Rhonda in one of our discussion circles that identified that a lot of our educational methods are based on positivist teaching, which is really common in research fields where students are basically encouraged to kind of replicate what they're taught, and we're not encouraged to kind of critically question the source material. On all these things, thinking about this on a macro scale with what we learned from Gomez and Lee's work and Dr. Calvez and his colleagues' work, where they both keynotes emphasize that we need to be focusing on a diversity of voices, but also the diversity of sources of knowledge that could be present within a space, where Dr. Gomez and Lee would have indicated that we need to be kind of bridging the gap between formal and informal learning contexts. And Dr. Calvez and colleagues would have talked about including indigenous and traditional research methods and practices. it kind of indicated to me that we're creating spaces where our knowledge sources are rigidly defined, but it's also that it's hard to deny that our research practices are really Eurocentric, and we're not given the tools to kind of identify the power dynamics that's present there. I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Asia. I really feel like, Hadra, you really connect a lot with what Asia is saying by really unpacking the biological classroom. Can you please explain?
Yes, I totally agree with Asia. It's one thing that's mainly reason it, or actually I had a question when I read about all the work we read and all that we discussed. The question is, why are we teaching or why are we learning? Because most of the time in biological science, we learn in early classes, we learn to learn facts and to learn concepts, which is absolutely great. We need to learn facts and concepts. But what if there's a way to learn facts and concepts and also encourage the students to have more parallel skills? I think this is the way that we may need to, this is the most meaningful way for me, because yes, it's very important to know all those things, and the program is very big and it's very difficult, it's very complicated and very, it's the professor don't necessarily have the time to give all these parallel skills, but if we rethink the way we're teaching and rethink the way we're learning, we may have a way of doing that. So are we learning for learning facts, or are we learning to foster those parallel skills that we want to instill in our students? Because we're not necessarily teaching just to have a researcher later. We are teaching because we're teaching the citizen of the world. We are teaching the scholar, yes, but also very importantly, the citizen. And for me, one thing that is important is to make the students realize that what they're learning, it's their own after. And it's really, I have this knowledge, and how can I apply to my day-to-day life? Because we saw it between the pandemic. We all have science classes, but at the end, how many of us had to go back to internet or to literature to try to understand what the politics were saying, what the scientists were saying, what the doctor were saying. And if we don't understand, and if classes don't, or school don't give us the tools to understand what's happening, how can you take the best decision you can for your life or for your health? So one thing that I think is very important would be to, yes, teach the student how to, the concept and the fact, but make sure that we made them understand how to make it relatable to their life. And because all the students are different, we will have different answer, and just the student having different answer and different life. For example, you will have, you can teach the students by, well, each other's. So for example, one student, you teach me this molecular mechanism. I can understand it via a disease, I can understand it via food, I can understand it via ecology, and the student will be able to to become a researcher, know what research is, to understand the concept and the facts, and also they will be able to foster some creativity and learn what they like, which is very important. You don't want to just have students who know things. You want students who know what they like, and maybe you will foster new researchers, because now there's a lack of researchers, but if students don't know what they like, they don't know what they want to research on, some of them don't even know what research is. They think it's this person going into the wild and just like picking insects or whatever. Yes, it is, but it's even bigger than that. So yes, I think as I think Rhonda and Asia both said, it's all a question of contextualization and make sure that the student can apply what they learn to their day-to-day life, and they can share it also to the teachers, to their peers. And this is one of the most efficient way to learn and to teach also. So I think instead of having this vertical kind of teaching, I think a more circular way would be so much more efficient and so much more meaningful for everyone.
If I may, I will just want to make a very quick comment. I think it all comes back to celebrating the diversity and creativity of students, and starting from what they know or what their culture is, what their context is, and I think that is what should be the basis of curriculum planning, rather than state mandated standardized testing or curriculum. It should be what students know, and basing on what they already know, we design what they further want to know, what they further want to explore. Yeah.
I'm wondering, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to ask our panels already to adapt. Our time is, I'm looking at our time, and I'm thinking we had 2 questions, and what I wanted to do is maybe combine them and invite you to kind of think about how you want to share. You don't have to answer both, but you can think about what you want to share with the rest of the group. So we had 2 other questions that were kind of coming back throughout our time together, and we're talking about these gaps and these tensions in our fields, but we also wanted to start sharing with you because we got excited together hearing about some of each other's experiences that kind of bring life to some of these themes that we're looking at. So one of the questions asking was, what experience has been making you excited and hopeful about creating better learning environments? So we got ideas, but what kinds of experiences are bringing these themes to life for you? And also, if we think about the readings and the talks and our conversations, what are commitments or new knowledges that propel you forward that you want to invite our audience to also think about as this kind of warm up into our conference? So I was going to maybe start,
I want to just throw it to Wei Wei. I think she has something to say in regards to that or the previous.
Oh yeah, go for it, please. I was actually going to start with you, Wei, so you should jump in and then just keep going.
I love that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to quickly jump in to respond to what Hadra just said. I think what you said really rings a bell for me. Because, in STEM education, there's a huge discussion around our goal, one of our important goals is to diversify the STEM workforce pipeline. We want to, different students, promising students can have this opportunity to join, to pursue the careers or future, education in STEM fields. But I think throughout the learning process, what really matters is what they learn, what skills they develop, and what kind of experience they kind of have throughout the whole process. I think some of them are transferable to other, learning and life scenarios, not necessarily, for their future STEM or STEM career or education, but something that's really important to their life. So yes, I think this is what I'm thinking.
Can you tell us about your student voice project work?
Yes, of course. Yes. Actually, I have a lot of examples to share with you, but today I will only focus on 2. So I'm gonna talk about some wonderful and beautiful students' work from a research project called Student Voice Equity Project. So this is basically a project we've been doing with high school students in Los Angeles public schools. So we kind of like look at how their experience look like in the classrooms and how we can support their authentic expression in the project making, in computing. So I want to share 2 examples, which really makes me, appreciate more this active learning concept to marry, students' interest in their cultural backgrounds and their prior knowledge with, computing and computer science learning. I think one example is from a girl who actually creatively made a music app. So actually this kind of like projects kind of like combined her interest in reading literature and her love for Taylor Swift's music. So in this music game, she actually kind of like create a setting that can help readers to match which book excerpts, go along well with which Taylor Swift song. So for example, if you're reading this, you have to listen to this. So this is actually a kind of like wonderful app which speaks to her own interest in reading and music. These 2 things seem very irrelevant to computer science, but actually inviting her interest into this computing project, she found that she is able to contribute to her own project and to learn better and to learn more in this computer science concept. So I think this is really wonderful. And a second example that I want to share briefly is also from a girl who, during the COVID pandemic, she actually created a kind of program to simulate how the virus is spread, like in our daily interactions. I think we kind of like provide students with an open space for them to develop what they really want and what they really care about. So I think this is a really wonderful opportunity to celebrate students' authentic expression in computer science learning.
Thanks. So we're gonna try and we're gonna keep this condensed, maybe a couple of minutes each. I was thinking in terms of talking about your student voice project, it makes me think of Midhat, the kind of work you're doing, especially with the Create to Solve DIY STEAM kits, community voice, and also just the community involvement in those projects. I'm wondering if you could jump in with
Yeah, thank you, Corey. I think building on what Vaivai said now and earlier as well about using culturally responsive pedagogy, I think for me what keeps me alive and doing what I'm doing right now, I think it kind of goes back for me to the research project we did as part of my master's thesis. So as Corey mentioned, it's called Create to Solve Do-It-Yourself STEAM Kits. We call it Create to Solve because students had an opportunity to design useful products to solve their community problems. So what we did was we designed some DIY STEAM kits that were based on community problems and needs. We first surveyed and interviewed community members that what are the problems that might need fixing or that might need students to get together and solve them. And we came up with 2 major problems of ineffective waste disposal because we did this project with socially and economically disadvantaged community students. So the 2 major problems that came out to be was ineffective waste disposal and electricity shortage. So we designed 2 kits that were built on those community problems, and students had an opportunity to use those kits and collect some recyclable and reusable items from their own land, honoring, I think it kind of connects me back to Dr. Calvert's work on honoring land and honoring the place. So they collected items from their own communities and designed those products from those communities. And I think the discussion we're having about connecting it to the real life problems, and I think it made me very surprising that the students, when we interviewed them after the project, that how was your experience of designing these projects that were based on their own problems, they expressed engagement and empowerment, that even if we were able to solve these problems on a small scale, like designing a small battery-operated fan or flashlight, it has empowered us and made us realize that the education is not entirely something that we cannot choose, and it's very valuable for us to learn about electric circuits, to learn about all the STEM concepts. And I think I really like to take this opportunity to share that students are very creative, and they amazed us with their indigenous designs and ways of knowing. So I think it kind of connects back to what we have been discussing right now. And I think it's just one way, what I'm sharing is just one way and one approach of doing it. And I'm sure there are, I'm positive and hopeful that there are multiple other approaches that we can implement.
Thank you. Talking about community responsive and culturally responsive practices, I want to jump to Rhonda in terms of the ways that you keep bringing back and centering land in a lot of the our discussions and examples. I wonder if you'd want to jump in.
Yeah, sure. So when I talked earlier about cognition, we often see it as an individual process, and one of the things that I like about ecological perspectives, it's that it asks not what's inside your head, but what your head's inside of. And these are multiple concentric circles of relationship and being. And so when I say relationship, I mean the ways in which we interact, not just with people, but also inanimate objects. Most of you are having a relationship right now with your phone, with the pens that you are using. It's the ways in which you manipulate and hold things. And it's sometimes a little strange for Westerners to hear the concept of a relationship outside of voice or humans. And what I'm excited about in the field of language studies is the way that we're taking it into translanguaging and land-based pedagogy. So translanguaging is something you may not have heard of, but it's the concept that we all are built with multiple dialects in our first language. And when we come to learn a second, third, or fourth languages, they are all coming together in a composite repertoire in our minds. And it's the way that we socially distance or not, the way that we touch each other or that we don't. And these are all based on our social interactions with one another. So when I moved to Quebec and everyone was double kissing me, I was like, oh my God, what is happening? Very new to me. But I've learned, I've adapted, and that's part of my relationship to the culture and the people here. And so for Ophelia Garcia, who came up with the term translanguaging, she feels that it's not only challenging the ways and the normative ways of thinking, so the robin and the cardinal, but she actually feels that it starts to delineate and erase the hierarchies that a lot of settler colonial institutions have put up with. And I'd like to take her research even farther, and I have done that with a colleague of mine, John Wayne Dela Cruz, is to actually start taking it to the land itself. That's, again, very hard for Westerners to sort of come to grip with, and that's because they're not from this land, and that's okay. I'm not from this land either. You know, all of my ancestors were brought here against their will, and it's not something that I'm happy about, and it's really easy for me to say, well, it's not my problem. I didn't come here. I didn't ask to be here. The fact of the matter is that this is where I live. This is where my son is born, and this is where all my future generations at some point will live. And so for me to start having a relationship with the land means that I have to understand it somehow. And the easiest way to understand how to have a relationship with the land is to center Indigenous voices. Now, this came to me yesterday, and I don't believe in coincidences, because yesterday was the beginning of Indigenous History Month. So I would like to just read the title out for people to write it down. It's called Read, Listen, and Tell, Indigenous Stories from Turtle Island. When you download, you can go to the website, it's Wilfrid Laurier University Press. You can download it's 50 pages, it's a PDF on how to teach this book. And it's a great starting point for you to start to think about your relationships to the land and the way different people have had relationships to the land. And I want to just end on one concept, that Tiohtià:ke has ecological memory, okay? The lands here where many people were coming here from all different nations, and it's because of the way the waters flowed. So Tiohtià:ke is shaped like a shoe. And so when the land comes, people would stop. And so ecolinguist Daniel Nettle says that in arid regions, there tends to be only one or two language varieties. But in regions where there's lots of water and lots of rainfall, not only does it attract biodiversity on the land, it attracts people. And so something about this land is multiplicitous. It invites diversity. And every time we put a policy down that says one thing only, one language only, one crop only, it doesn't make sense. It's ecologically incompatible with the way this land is. And part of our undoing our Western logics is undoing that concept of one way only. Multiple things, multiple people, multiple ways of being. Thanks.
Thank you. And talking about relationships, Asia, you've talked about in your work building relationships with community, and so thinking about partnerships.
I feel like what really and truly gives me hope moving forward is how well-renowned and respected institutions who are at the center of our health research are kind of coming to grips with their coloniality, and at the very least their colonial history, because it means that we have an opportunity to, one, have conversations such as these where we discuss how our spaces come to be as they are, but also the rules and norms behind and traditions behind how we build these educational and pedagogical spaces. And then beyond that, it gives us a chance to spread our wings, I guess, open up our spaces more and invite more community-centric, well, not community-centric, but invite more traditional and indigenous voices into the fold. It allows us to kind of legitimize informal educational spaces, because a lot of times these traditional and indigenous voices would be tend to be found in those informal spaces. So,
thanks. And we'll wrap up here with Hajara talking maybe a little bit of bringing us back to the research context. And I know you're talking about work with the CIRH and STEM McGill.
Oh yeah, yeah. So one thing that makes me very happy and hopeful is the fact that first there's a lot of initiative to include more diversity, but also all kind of diversity. So it can be your gender, your ethnicity, and also diversity of learning too. So one clause, for example, if you're applying for a grant, now a governmental grant, is how diverse is your lab, and also what are you doing so that the diverse people in your lab are actually in a positive and very inclusive environment. Because it's great to ask for diversity just for the sake of diversity, but if they're not fostering who they really are, who they're not embracing who they really are, they're not going to make good research. They're not going to be good researcher at all. They're just going to be a plug and play, and you don't necessarily want that. You want to have very important conversation. You want to have exchanges that are going to be mind-changing. So one thing, this is one thing that is very important, very helpful and very nice that is happening. And also, as I said, the fact that there's more diversity of teaching. So you see more and more, in French we call that apprentissage par problème. So you will have one question that you will need to answer, but you will use different things that you learn from this class, from course 1, course 2, and course 3, and you're all going to mix it all together and think about one problem, which is great for everything. That you want to be a researcher, or you want to be, you're a citizen, a regular citizen. So I think it's great. And also you see more and more people using their parallel skills. You see TikTok videos, you see music, you see paintings, and all related to STEM, and that's great. That's great to realize that STEM people are plural, they're diverse, and not necessarily just in diversity as we call it all the time. It's diverse in our way of thinking and of our different interests and skills.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. So we're really hoping that when you come to our keynotes today that you think about these incredible researchers, their work, their context, and you hear these echoes in the keynotes in their work that they're going to share with us. And the goal of this panel was not to come and share these polished outcomes, but really to invite you into the discussion that we've been having over 4 reading circles. We met over the past 2 months, and I had the chance to get a glimpse into their lives and their work, and I realized that our panel reminds us of our work in grounding our collaboration and our research on collaboration in commitments towards transformative justice. Learning that will help us to respond to the inequities and violence that shape our classrooms. In one of our discussions, Alex, I'm going to ask you to skip to 2 slides. The next one. Next one. There we go. One of our discussions, Rhonda, a lot of us love Leanne Simpson. If you've read her work, if you haven't, please do. Rhonda shared this quote, and we wanted to kind of share it with you today from Landa's Pedagogy. Do you want to?
Yes. My experience of education from kindergarten to graduate school was one of coping with someone else's agenda, curriculum, and pedagogy. Someone who was not interested in my well-being as a girl, my connection to my homeland, my language or history, and my Anishinaabe intelligence. No one ever asked me what I was interested in, nor did they ask for my consent to participate in their system. My experience of education was one of continually being measured against a set of principles that required surrender to an assimilative colonial agenda in order to fulfill those principles.
So how many people in the room have been or are grad students? Haha, nice, okay. So these 4 words follow me around everywhere, and they tug at my work. And those words, those big words, are epistemology, ontology, axiology, methodology. So what are the ways of being, the ways of knowing, and the ways of doing that are shaping and guiding our work? So I look at this conference as an emerging practitioner researcher and thinking with others about conferences as those 4 words, as epistemology. We are learning about learning together. So there are these 2 kind of overarching questions when I look at our discussions over the last 2 months that, again, bringing to you, we're going to bring you some more questions. We're just going to leave you with questions to take away from this. So first, what are our epistemological commitments when we talk about active learning in our various contexts? How do the ways we learn, the ways we come to know what we know, and also what we don't know, think about that, my students love when I do that dance. So think about what we know, and what we don't know, and how do these ways of knowing and learning shape the ways that we come together? And maybe even more important is, how do the ways that we come together shape what we can know and what we can do together? So that's the question. Another question is, what does epistemological justice look like in our collaborations? Have you heard of epistemological justice? Yeah. Dr. Gurmindo Bambara writes about decolonizing our epistemological commitments by looking at epistemological justice. She asks us, what are the grand narratives, the big stories that structure the context, so the inequities and the possibilities within which we come to understand ourselves and others and our collaborations? Research tells stories. Data collection tells stories. Conferences tell and retell stories. And these stories shape who we listen to and what ways of knowing continue to have power over others. Stories about success, progress, excellence, engagement, alignment, happiness, health, intelligence. These stories have so much power over us and how we're going to take care of each other in these times.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, I also come to this space as a graduate student in my 3rd year, and I've felt like I've had to dedicate myself, my extracurricular time, to cultivating spaces to critique and reassess what and how we come to know what we're learning. And so really overall, I champion this notion of epistemic justice. And I feel like in this panel, we really tried to model what epistemic disruption and epistemic plurality can look like in an academic space. Really taking from Sturgeon Lake First Nation scholar Willie Ermine, our panel today it's a call for the role that we can all make to creating ethical spaces of engagement. So a neutral zone where different cultures, perspectives, and peoples can coexist and expand their repertoire, a space where parties can critique and be critiqued, priming the next generation to be leaders to change social problems. And one of my favorite sentiments as it relates to equitable learning is from Francisco Valdez, who calls educators to adopt a post-subordination vision. So really trying to have a framework beyond what we cease to know of the constraints and the problems and the gaps, and actually start positively articulating the environments that we want to be in. So I pose this question to the audience, and we have, I guess Corey said, a lot of questions for you. But what does an institution, a conference, a classroom look like when it privileges plural knowledges? And so we can go to the next slide.
This is it. Oh, go back.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Go back.
You were there. It was in your mind.
It was there.
Yeah.
So as we kind of end this session, we really want to talk about how equitable classrooms, looking at our colonial patterns is an everyday process. So this was not a place to get all the answers. It was a place to move us forward, to continue questioning and reassessing. So these are some of the questions that as a group we still have and we want to pose to you for further thought. So the first one, what kind of relationships are privileged through various active learning approaches? Actually, that's different. This is here, but I'm gonna just use these ones because of time. You can talk to me later if you want more of our questions. So reflect on the implications of your positionality. What power and privilege do you have as a researcher or instructor? How can the instructor and researcher's positionality be centered in the classroom? As an instructor or researcher, what commitments can you make to implementing equitable and collaborative learning strategies in your pedagogy? What type of administrative and communal support do educators need to ground equitable and collaborative learning in the classroom? What ways of knowing or types of relationships are marginalized by some of our approaches to active learning? And how can active learning make possible the kind of transformative learning that responds to the deep harm and profound hope we need to move forward with together?
So we have 5 minutes, and I'm a type A teacher in the classroom. I think time and breaks and pauses are really important. Ideally, we would have had a Q&A where we invited people who are joining us virtually and in the audience to ask questions. But we also really, really want to make sure that you are refreshed. And for our keynote and opening at 12:45, which is a half-hour break if we end about now. And so I'm going to just maybe get a thumbs up if we're okay, maybe even everyone in here, if we're okay with the fact that Q&A, we have 2 days together of asking questions. So if you can think of the questions that you might have wanted to ask today, that you carry them with you into the keynote session, the amazing people who are joining us and sharing their work throughout the next 2 days. Are we okay with that? Yeah? So it's now 12:11, and our next session is going to be in here at 12:45. We really hope that you come ready. We have a lot to say, a lot to share, so that punctuality, we lost 8 minutes, and that was our Q&A. But if we can be here at 12:45 for all the people that want to kind of open up SALTISE officially. Am I forgetting anything else?
I don't think so.
Okay, I just want to take these last minute to just, Jamila and I, we kind of imagined this project. It wasn't perfect, I just wish we had more time. I wish we could have met in person to actually have this conversation. We did it over Zoom. But to just say that incredibly grateful, this is labor, this is work, and that you took the time. Originally we said 2 sessions, it ended up being 4. And we met, we talked, and I just felt like there was such a generosity with your time and your work. And to come here today and share and launch the conference, it's a real pleasure and privilege for SALTISE to have all of you here. Yeah, and I don't know, Jamila, if you want to say anything else, but.
Yeah, Corey, thank you. I'm so grateful for all of you and everyone who's attended today. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Happy SALTISE.